Ladies and gentlemen, fans of prog or those who are looking to get into the genre, James Johnson is your best friend. He's the individual that submitted this idea for a top 10 list. This is the top 10 progressive rock / metal bands of all time. But I have to start with something before that. He's going to be your best friend because you're not going to hear just 10 names. In fact, in the list itself, you're actually going to hear 13. But there's also going to be a lot of mentions that I have to read to you. Now, like whenever I was talking about the 20 bands that you should know or should listen to if you're a new metalhead, I'm going to try to do this slowly, but if need be, pause the video and write some of these down and check out the works. And this will also show you, hopefully, and display to you just how vast and diverse that progressive music truthfully is. Here are the bands that are honorable mentions, didn't make it to the list, and there's a lot of them. Gentle Giant, Camel, Caravan, Hawkwind, Enchant, Pain of Salvation, Electric Light Orchestra, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Goblin, Vandergraaf Generator, Threshold, Alan Parsons and the Alan Parsons Project, Soft Machine, Vanden, Plas, IQ, Ozric Tentacles, Early Supertramp, King's X, The Flower Kings, Early Dire Straits, Shadow Gallery, Ayreon, Spocks Beard, Beardfish, The Explorers Club, Karnivool, Transatlantic, Bigelf, Tool, Coheed and Cambria, Astra, Gordian Knot, Sleepytime Gorilla Museum, Amorphis, Arc, Evergrey, Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Maudlin of the Well, Mars Volta, OSI, Pure Reason Revolution, Riverside, Oceansize, Panic Room, Haken, Flying Colors, Storm Corrosion, Between the Buried and Me, Tesseract, and Motorpsycho. And there are tons that I'm sure that I missed. But those are the ones that came to mind, which shows you that I love progressive music. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about the top 10, and we're going to go from 10 to 1. Number 10 on this list, we have Queensryche and Fate's Warning in a tie, principally because they came around at right around the same time and each had a principal influence with the genre whenever it came to the 80s and the early 1990s and even currently, but they did so in different ways. Queensryche were able to break through a little bit more and had a little bit more of that old heavy metal convention, whereas Fate's Warning definitely were able to use the protocol of a prog band a little bit more to their benefit, though their early albums do feature a lot of impressive shredding. During the 1990s, we definitely saw a difference in Fate's Warning's sound, and Queensryche has certainly gone through its own struggles, but both of these bands are very, very critical pieces of the prog puzzle, especially whenever you talk about Queensryche. Queensryche were able to break through with albums such as Operation Mindcrime and Empire and songs such as Silent Lucidity. And these are actually songs that became crossover hits. They were on the radio and they were huge successes. They were big for the band, not to mention huge for the genre. Number 9 is Marillion. Marillion is another band that gained a lot of popularity in the 1980s and still, as far as I know, is making music. And this is a group that certainly had a couple of big hits, and they were certainly more so in the first part of the 1980s. Kaylee is one of the big songs that I can certainly recall. But these guys are fantastic. They fostered the old ideas and the old morals that were present in the 1970s prog boom that occurred, and were able to take it another step further. There was definitely a huge storytelling aspect to some of their albums, but at the same time, these guys just had a great, great musical aspect to them. Their musical storytelling was just as potent as their lyrical storytelling, which is the reason why Marillion is on this list, and certainly is, number 9. Number 8, yeah, there's a little bit of personality in here. Opeth and Porcupine Tree, both tied. Now, these are both bands that started in the first part of the 1990s, or really, if you want to say, be technical, the latter stages of the 1980s, but both have had a critical role in really fostering the ideas of progressive music to a brand new generation, and they've done it in 2 specific ways. This is kind of like the Fate's Warning and Queensryche at number 10. Porcupine Tree started off as a little bit more of a psychedelic project, one that definitely had a lot more of those ideas, and then evolved into a standard prog rock project, and even has influenced a little bit of progressive metal with albums such as In Absentia in the 2000s. However, this band has been able to be a huge, huge influence based around the composition of atmosphere, the ideas of atmosphere, and just the composition of their works. This is taking prog back to its earliest roots of just, good old-fashioned prog pop songs that have a little bit of rock and roll or metal influence to them, heavy riffing, just great stuff, You know, I really, really love Porcupine Tree, and I think that is no secret. Opeth, on the other hand, took it to the extreme metal genre. This is something that we saw with the jazz crossovers to death metal with bands such as Cynic and Atheist. However, Opeth was able to really foster in the new idea of progressive death metal, and this is certainly the band that was able to really put that spin on the genre, probably the best, considering they came along during its earliest version. And Opeth to this day are still continuing to foster in ideas of progressive metal and have actually taken their sound a little bit further away from that death metal aspect and back to a traditional prog idea from the 1970s. So it's almost like turning back the clock and understanding the roots. Both of these bands contain individuals in Michael Ackerfeet and Steven Wilson that have a deep, deep-seated love for progressive music. This is something that drives them, and the 1970s are definitely hotbeds. They've mentioned names on interviews and things like that that I'm sure individuals that are old enough hadn't heard in years, and for those who have never heard of them, certainly probably encourage them to check it out. Names such as Camel, names such as Caravan, names such as Van de Graaf Generator, and names perhaps on this list. Number 7 is Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa is a great transitionary member of this list, and the reason for that is very, very simple. He is easily one of the most musically gifted, weird, and just out there musicians that we've probably ever seen since the history of the recorded work. The gentleman has so many albums and had so many ideas that span so many different genres that he basically embodied the term progression, principally because from one track to the next, he may be incorporating a completely different style. From one album to the next, he might be doing something completely off-kilter from the last thing. And it's definitely something where the musical value to it is always, always pleasing. The fact that he has so many radical and weird and fanciful ideas is certainly one of the things that embodies the term progressive as well. Not to mention some of the things that actually broke through, the very few that did, certainly proved to be an inspiration point for many, many artists of the future. Those that were able to embody his musical principles while also keeping their lighthearted side. This is a gentleman that still has work that hasn't seen the light of day. That's how much there is. The archives for Frank Zappa are massive, which means that we're going to be getting new Frank Zappa work for ages to come. Number 6 is Dream Theater, a modern band on this list and probably the highest from a band that formed, right at the turn of the 1990s. Of course, Dream Theater really need no introduction. They have a discography review on this channel, much like Opeth, but at the same time, Dream Theater has been the band that has been cited the most as bringing progressive music back to the top, at least whenever it comes to importance. This is certainly a band that was able to really add not only the theatrical aspect to this with albums such as Metropolis 2, Scenes from a Memory, but also really just amp up the idea of progressive metal in America and really worldwide. I don't know why I'm just focusing on America, probably thanks to that last video that we did. But they certainly did a lot of great things and still are doing some great things in order to really maintain themselves as the biggest prog band on the planet right now. And that is why we love them. They have just 5 world-class musicians seemingly at all times, even whenever they are dismissing somebody, which is rare considering the current version of the band has been together for, well, only a couple of years, but before that it was roughly about a 10-year run. And it's just something where they always seem to bring on board somebody who's just as qualified as the person who left. Number 5 is King Crimson. King Crimson has a critical album within the Court of the Crimson King, but other albums such as Red are certainly huge moments in prog history as well. This is a project that started in the late 1960s and really transformed the way a lot of people looked at music. And these are also guys that have been working on music, whether it be with other projects, other bands, or trying to reincarnate King Crimson ever since. It's certainly been a project that has come and went throughout the course of now close to 50 years. These guys are transformative, and they really looked at music a lot differently than a lot of their contemporaries, which is one of the main reasons why they immediately stuck out. And it's one of the main reasons why progressive music really started to take its grip. These guys are transformative. Once you listen to some of the tracks, you will instantly be changed forever. There are songs such as Lark's Tongue and Aspect that were covered by bands such as Dream Theater, who were also on this list, so they certainly are an important part of the prog community, and certainly one of the best bands within the prog community of all time. Speaking of those, Genesis, number 4. Whether it's Peter Gabriel's Genesis or the Genesis that you hear from the one and the only Phil Collins, this is a band that for 3 or 4 decades definitely was able to push the boundaries of prog and really transform it into a bit of a carnival atmosphere. Gabriel was so out there and had so many strange ideas for not only the albums but also the stage shows that Genesis concerts became infamous for the different things that went on. Now, once he left to pursue a solo career and Phil Collins took over, the music did change a little bit, but at the same time, that old Genesis feeling still maintained itself. Now, whenever both men decided to go solo, and for Collins, he was doing that while a member of Genesis, we definitely saw a transformation of what the style was. And Genesis itself kind of suffered a little bit near the end, but the stuff was still solid, that's the thing. Genesis is also a band that is fiercely divided amongst a lot of individuals within the rock community. It's been said that for the 50 people that like Genesis, there are 100 people that hate them, and that's something I've never quite understood. Principally because their work is not only catchy and easily accessible in some regard, but whenever it's not, it's interesting. It has a very awesome little texture to it, and it always, it never fails to really amaze me the different things they were able to come up with in the studio. It made you wonder if they were taking anything or this or that, but those are questions for another day. Genesis is a great band regardless, and definitely one that you should check out if you're new to prog, because they're one of the top 10 of all time. Number 3 is split into 2 with Kansas and Jethro Tull. We all know Jethro Tull, we all know Ian Anderson, Sitting on a Park Bench, Aqualung, we know Thick as a Brick, and everything like that. But these guys were really, really important because they were able to incorporate a myriad of other instruments into the progressive landscape, something that had been happening before with other styles of music, but they did it with this, and it gave it more of an epic feel. It gave it more of an ethereal feel or a mythical feel, whatever you want to call it, and whatever the situation really called for. They had some of the most interesting ideas that you'll see within prog at that time, next to Genesis, and certainly were able to incorporate into songs that were able to transform themselves into not only prog hits, but also classic rock hits. Jethro Tull and Kansas are both bands that really incorporate that, considering Carry On Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind are 2 transformative hits for Kansas that were able to really break through on the charts and do well. But whenever you listen to Kansas's albums, such as Point of No Return, man oh man, you start to recognize that this is a band that had wide scope, multiple part songs, opuses, epics, things that really had been happening in music, but not really in this way or in this style. It definitely had a new feel to it, and it was something that the contemporaries were getting on board with and were doing as well. So let's talk about some of them. Let's talk about number 2. Let's talk about Rush. One of the newest members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as of 2013, Rush was huge in the 1970s and early 1980s and still maintains that hugeness today. They're a fantastic, phenomenal band, both live and in the studio. Their early works were pristine works of progressive music, and even whenever the music started to veer a little bit more toward the classical rock direction, it still maintained itself as wonderful. Rush's earliest opuses definitely embodied the progressive subgenre or genre of music to the T, and Geddy Lee still remains to be one of the most focused upon individuals in the entire rock and roll landscape based around his voice. Neil Peart's drums, what more needs to really be said about a band everything has already been said about? We reviewed Clockwork Angels a couple of years ago, which came out right around my birthday, I think in 2012. Fantastic album, fantastic time. If you don't like Rush because of the voice, you should listen to it again and recognize it for the subtle genius that it really is. And believe me, if you're only listening to Tom Sawyer, you're not getting the entire Rush story. Expand your horizons. That brings us to number 1, and yes, this may seem a bit of a personal pick, considering one of their albums is one of my 25 most essential and favorite albums of all time, but it's certainly one that matters, and a band that certainly matters. And that's the band Yes. During the latter part of the 1960s, early part of the 1970s, principally the early part of the 1970s, Yes was one of the most dominant prog forces that were out there. Perhaps not the one that was listened to by the most people, however, the ones that were really defining what prog was 100%. Close to the Edge is a mammoth work. It's certainly one that showcases just how deep and dense and layered and fantastic that progressive music could sound, while at the same time also having a subtle idea of positivity to it. I love this band, and I think that you guys will as well. Many people will know them because of Owner of a Lonely Heart, which came out in the early part of the 1980s, and it was a huge crossover hit. And that's certainly something that helped Yes's longevity, but at the same time, it was something where true prog fans felt as though they'd abandoned their roots a little bit, considering it sounded a little bit more closer to the traditional rock and roll spectrum. Now, in recent times, Yes has, disbanded and rebanded and have put out albums, and they just released one, I do believe, a year ago or so, and there's going to be another one here in 2014. They're currently touring some of their classic albums, including ones such as Close to the Edge, and Fragile. And they still remain to be a popular live act, considering I still can't get fucking tickets to these shows because they sell out so damn quick. If you haven't really, really dug into Yes's discography, and I'm especially talking their 1970s work, you are really doing yourself as a disservice as not only a progressive music fan, but also just generally as a rock fan. Well, there you have it. 13 bands that made it to the list, a list of 10. Figure that math out. And then probably about 30 mentions. If you want to get into, prog music, whether it be rock or metal, you have plenty of places to begin. To recollect those mentions, go back to the first part of this video and, take out a pencil or paper. Either that or turn on the subtitles, but those probably won't work. I would list these all in the description box. Maybe I will. If I didn't, then... whoops. I'll talk to you guys later. And to the gentleman who suggested this, I want to thank you for the pleasure, because this was great. Later.